All right, my friends. So I had a great opportunity just now to interview a guy named Finn McKinty, who runs a YouTube channel called the Punk Rock MBA. And I love this guy. I love his YouTube channel. I also love what he's doing as a business entrepreneur as well. In my music that I love, which is metalish, hardcore, never really got into punk so much, but more of the I've always loved his hard music. I don't know why. It's one of my. If I ever get rich, I'm going to investigate why do some people love this type of music. I just don't know. Because initially I thought maybe it's because they come from broken homes, but then there's lots of hardcore kids that came from wealthy families in the suburbs of DC and the suburbs of New York. So can't just be that. And I don't know. There's just something that I'll never forget. My first two albums I ever had. Believe it or not, my parents used to listen to a lot of reggae. Peter Tosh, obviously Bob Marley, Marley's son, I forgot his name, and then just lots of reggae. Desmond Decker. So growing up for that, I always enjoyed it. They listened to Cat Stevens. He's become kind of crazy, but just a lot of. They didn't listen to mamas and papas so much. It's more, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. Not pop music, but just a lot of interesting music. Jesus Christ Superstar we used to hear all the time. There's a Christmas Revels that I forgot the name. It's just, wonderful. I just remember some of those was a Cat Stevens or the guy who did the shipwreck in Michigan Lakes. I forgot that guy's name. But anyway, a lot of cymbals, and I just love the energy of music. I always did growing up. Anyway, so I started collecting some albums when I was like 9 and 10 years old. We'd go into town in Maine, and there's a record store. You could get albums for like $3.99, which is, when you think about it, it's actually pretty expensive. But back then, I didn't know. But anyway, I remember I got Rush, Caress of Steel, which I liked. I liked it. And now I like it a lot more. Back then, it was very progressive for me. And I got Kiss Dynasty, and I love Kiss. I got Kiss, all the Kiss albums, which I loved. And I got Rush, Kiss, Police, and I remember Bee Gees and that disco stuff was always big on the radio too. Believe it or not, I actually liked the Bee Gees, believe it or not. But then I remember I got Black Sabbath, Into the Void. And by then I was 10 years old, I think. I was able to go in town by myself, which nowadays, if you let your kid go to the bus stop, you get arrested. And I was 10 years old, taking the boat, going in town, coming back, just having a blast. It was a blast growing up in the 70s. Anyway, I remember I got Black Sabbath, Into the Void, and I just remember listening to this and like, oh, where have you been all my life? It was so hard. Into the Void. I mean, it was a master of reality. But I remember hearing the song Into the Void and just saying, where have you been? It was just like, it was one of those moments in my life. I just like, it all made sense. It was nuts. And then I remember when I went to live with my dad in Portland. And I'd be going to, I'd have to walk from Portland right by King Middle School through town down to downtown to Portland High School. And I'd always run late because my dad would go to work before I would go to school. And I'd just be jamming to AC/DC, Back in Black. What else? A Quiet Riot album, which I didn't like that much, but they had that one song. I forgot what it was. Not the stupid Girls Rock Your Boys. I hated that stuff. But they had that one other song. I forgot what it was. But Bang Your Head, and then they also had Def Leppard. I just remember listening to that, but I remember Black Sabbath, Back in Black. It's like, oh, that's so great. And then Scorpions came out with that horrible Rock You Like a Hurricane, and I was like, man, this is just starting to get bad. And I'll never forget. I was like, this isn't getting good. And then I found Iron Maiden, Flight of Icarus, Revelation. I was just like, so basically what happened was the music started getting more and more poppy. And I started getting less and less poppy and more hard. I wanted more hard. So I found, I don't know, just some more heavier bands. But back in Maine, you didn't have access to the internet. You didn't have access to, to get the records from bands in Boston and stuff. You just, you got what you could get at the store. And if I ever went, by then my dad had moved to DC. If I ever got the chance to go to a DC record shop, I'd pick up something. But I didn't know that much. Anyway, long story short, I moved to DC when I was 14 and a sophomore in high school. 14, yeah. It was Silver Spring, right outside D.C. And I'll never forget, me and this guy named Timmy, and I was sitting in his Chevette, sitting outside of Little Caesars, waiting on our pizza, because we just always used to, let's just put it this way. There's a reason you got hungry in high school, if you know what I'm saying. So we'd do stuff Go, this time it was just he and I, but other times it'd be a bunch of us. We'd do stuff, then go to Little Caesars to eat, to satisfy that for some reason we got hungry all of a sudden. And he puts his cassette tape in with a Void and Minor Threat. And just like when I first heard Black Sabbath, I was like, where have you been all my life? It was revolutionary. And ever since then, I've just been into hardcore. And I heard I never got a Black Flag. That just bored the hell out of me. The Dead Kennedys bored me. The GBH bored me. All that stuff, all that punkish stuff, I just bored me. But and I'm sure you would consider Void a punk band. I wouldn't. It was just hard, fast, furious. Went to my first show, which was the Exploited in 1985, I guess, and that was a big punk band from England. And I'm just a poor white kid from Maine, and I'm going to a show on Rhode Island Ave in D.C., and it was a cultural clash. Like, I'll never forget seeing all these freaks with their freaking mohawks like that. I forgot what they used to call them, the mohawks like that with the spiked up like that. I forgot what they called. It was just crazy. I'll never forget. We'd go to the show, me and my friend Will and a couple other guys, and just these guys would go insane in the pits. It was crazy. And then I said, no way I'm ever getting in there. No way. And then I think somebody pushed me in, and it was freaking awesome. I mean, I was 5'3", 5'4", $120, something like that. Tiny guy, probably 5'5", $150. But these guys were just huge. They looked so different. I mean, I remember, and as I got pushed in there, it was back in the old days of circle dancing. It was crazy. And I just remember it was fun. I was still pretty scared, but the next show I went to, I think it was Black Market Baby in DC, and it was ever since then I was like, oh. I remember we go to there's so many bands we've seen. I've shared these stories with you before, but we'd go up before I went in the Army, see Sick of It All, Cro-Mags. I'm just metal bands. I didn't really get into metal. I mean, I did. I didn't go to metal shows as much because there's a fine line between metal and hardcore back then. Youth of Today, just all kinds of bands. And when we're on break from DC, from Army, we'd come back to DC and go see some bands. Again, Sick of It All, Madball, just all kinds. It was freaking awesome. It's just no other way around that, going to these shows. And then something happened to hardcore. We became this karate chop stuff, this tough guy, gangster wannabe stuff. And that just bored me. I remember going up to Boston, seeing Blood for Blood and the Ducky Boys. And I was with a guy who had just gotten out of prison, and he had tattoos all over his head. And there's another guy, about four of us. My friend of mine in the Army lived up in Nashville, New Hampshire, and this one guy had tattoos over his head. This is before anyone did tattoos on their head. So a lot of people didn't even do tattoos at all back then. And I remember we got jumped because I guess they didn't like the way this guy looked or something like that. And this guy was literally in a South Florida prison. Let's just put it this way: he drew attention in a negative way. Let's just put it that way. And long story short, I said, yeah, we got jumped and we got out of there. It's funny because I just remember that wasn't. I was like, what? So you can't come to a different town and dance? You know what I'm saying? I remember the whole thing was just weird. I said, yeah, this isn't for me. And then I did a small record label. I had what's called a distro. I was trading music with people all over the world. It was freaking awesome. And I'd set up a table at all these shows in Phoenix. By then I lived in Phoenix, so I just go around. Overcome was playing. There's a band in Tucson. I forgot what they're called. They were playing. I just go, hey, could you guys care if I set up a show? I set up a table in the back and start selling stuff and trading. And go, nope. And I'd actually sell some of their merchandise with some of these bands. And I don't remember who. Look, I don't remember anyone's name or anything. I just remember setting up a table. Sometimes I just go and I get kicked out. But that was the start of my entrepreneurial days. And the interesting thing was my man Finn talks similar experience, which I think is great. Sadly, punk rock and hardcore is dominated by lefties who don't understand how to run a business. And so they gripe a lot about, they're being held back, and yet they don't know the slightest thing about how to run a business. And there are businessmen in music, and I look at like a band like Clutch, who's more mainstream, who's sold a ton of albums. They know how to run a business, not because they're successful, but because they do it right. And what I love about Finn's YouTube channel, he talks about the business side of things. And it doesn't mean you have to be a freaking a Donald Trump capitalist wannabe. It just means you have to say, look, there are things to do to run a business, and and I love it. I love his channel. I love the channel, and I love the way this guy talks. He's a business guy with a love of non-mainstream music. I love it. I highly suggest you watch his stuff. Subscribe to his channel. I just think it's fantastic. And for me, who's on the libertarian right, and for Finn, who I don't know, I don't know if he's on the left so much, but either way, I just don't know. Frankly, he's not a Christian; he's an atheist. He says, and I don't. That doesn't mean you're on the left. A lot of libertarians are atheists. I don't know where he stands politically, which is pretty cool. But anyway, I'm sure we don't see eye to eye on many, many different things. But he's just a good guy doing good work, trying to help people with their business, trying to help people with their band. I think it's great. That's what I love about YouTube. That's why I love YouTube. There's so many people out there doing great things and I just email him and say, hey, Finn, would you? And he said, yeah, because there are a lot of good guys and ladies. I think it's great, man. And anyway, hope you enjoy the episode. I'll put a link to the show notes and all the stuff that he does. Sign up for his stuff. You will not be disappointed. He knows music. Talk about a music geek. I was in a band, for sure, and I did the one thing I ever wanted to do. I ever wanted to put a demo out and play one show, and we did that. I was able to set it up and all that. And we had a guy named Caesar, and he was our band geek. And I'll never forget the band geek. And it's just because Caesar is a geek when it came to all the bands and music and whatnot. And Finn is a music geek. I mean, I guarantee if you ask him any band, he'd be like, oh, yeah, those guys, it's crazy, man. I don't know how a guy can have that much knowledge of music in his head. It's nuts. But anyway, we actually set that show up. There's a band called Darkest Hour who's got pretty prominent actually, and we played with them. The only show I'd ever played. I loved it, and but I did my bucket list. I set up a demo, and we set up a show, and I put it together. Obviously it wasn't just me, but by and large it was me. And we got a pretty decent crowd out there at George Mason in 1996, and a band that's still playing and still pretty big played with us, which is pretty cool. Our guitarist played with like Life in Agony. He played with all kinds of big bands too. And it's just cool, man. It's just cool to look in hindsight and to check off things on your bucket list. That was one of my bucket list things. I checked it off, and I was very comfortable ever since then to say, yeah, I was in a band, didn't do anything, put out a demo, played a show, and moved on. And I'm quite comfortable with that. So anyway, stay tuned, and I think you'll like this. Thanks now. First and foremost, Finn McKinty, is that old school Irish name, or what the hell kind of name is Finn McKinty first and foremost?
I'm told it's Scottish, but I don't know. My mother's American and my father's from Norway, so I don't know how I ended up with such a weird name, but here we are.
Right on. And just tell us a little bit about Finn. Just start with you said you were born in Bellingham, but just go from there. We'll get into some of this other stuff later on, but just tell us a little bit about Finn.
Yeah, so I was born in Bellingham, Washington, which is a little college town in between Seattle and Canada. Grew up in the Seattle area my whole life. After that, I moved, the whole first 18 years of my life. Moved around quite a bit after that. I ended up living in Ohio, in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus for a total of about 12 years through just kind of, the typical punk hardcore kid type of thing where you end up kind of wandering around and stumbling and making a lot of, you go into it certain you got it all figured out, and then come out the other side realizing you didn't know anything about anything.
Right.
But that's all good. It's part of the journey.
Yep.
So I did that. I ended up going back to college when I was 25, got a degree in management and marketing at the University of Cincinnati, which, is just a, middle of the road Midwest state school. But I feel like I got a fantastic education out of it. Ended up there, when I was a kid, I was really in love with music and skateboarding and graffiti and all that sort of thing. And then what I discovered when I was in school is that I actually fell in love with business. I just didn't, my family, my mom never really had much of a career. My dad was like in the Navy and then a corrections officer, and respect for that. But, neither of them knew a lot about business necessarily. They were not entrepreneurial types. I learned a lot from my dad. You spend 20 years babysitting murderers in a cage and you learn a thing or two. And I'm very grateful for that. But point being, I didn't know what business was or why it was such an exciting, cool, creative challenge. I look at business the same way as a painter looks at an empty canvas. I just rub my hands together like, ooh, cool. This is going to be fun. Let's see what we can do with this.
Yeah.
And that's really what I learned at school. And so after that, I've spent my career in kind of various creative fields. I did graphic design for a while for Abercrombie and Fitch, and then moved into a marketing role there. So I got to see kind of how I don't know if they're a Fortune 500 company, but probably close to it, if not.
This still in Cincinnati, or did you come back
That's
to?
in Columbus.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so I got to see how at least a giant multinational retailer does things. Went over to China to do a bunch of stuff for them, which was cool. China and Korea, Indonesia, Japan.
But you went all these places on behalf of the company.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, cool, man.
Yep, because we had factories over there, so that's what I did, is some kind of quality assurance kind of stuff for them. So again, that's the kind of like operational stuff. The scale of what a global retailer like that does, I think there's no other way to learn that other than to be part of that machine. And to be clear, I was a very small cog in that wheel. I wasn't calling the shots, but just to even see how that machine runs is super cool. Before that, I worked at a product design firm called Kaleidoscope in Cincinnati. We did industrial design and engineering. The two things I worked on there for the most part, it was mostly Procter and Gamble stuff. So I worked on Febreze and Swiffer quite a bit. This was a while ago, but even still, they don't redesign those products very often. So most of the Swiffer stuff that's on the shelf now, I had a hand in. Again, I don't know how big those brands are now, but they were just over the $1 billion mark at that time, and I'm sure there's several times that now. Tide alone made like 10 or 12 billion dollars then, and I'm sure it's probably twice that now. And again, just to see scale was such a cool opportunity. Again, I'm just a tiny cog in the machine, but you think about, for example, if you add 1 millimeter of plastic to the cap on the Tide bottle, and they make, I don't know, probably 1 billion bottles of that a year. Think about what that means, and how many Tide plants are there? Anything you do gets multiplied by every plant across the world, and application with shipping and all that other kind of stuff. And then after that, I worked for a technology company called Creative Live in Seattle. It's an online education platform for creators and entrepreneurs, mostly focused on photographers. So that was really cool. Got to learn how a venture-backed startup runs. We had some really top-notch investors like Greylock and Social Capital and Google Ventures. Got to be part of that and helped us. I've known the CEO and founder for like 20 years.
Now, were you still doing that in Columbus, or did you move?
That's in Seattle. I moved back to Seattle.
So did you move back to Seattle because of the gig, or did you say, I got to get back to the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, I just said I got to get out of Ohio. Much respect to Ohio, but it's not for me. I think if you're born here, I just run on a different speed. So that was cool. And then after that, I am now at my current role, which is I'm the director of operations for a company called URM Academy, which is an online education platform for music producers. Small company. There's like basically 5 of us that, there's some partners and then a couple contractors and stuff that kind of run the thing. And then I also do the YouTube thing, but I most people probably know me for YouTube, but to me, that's just like a fun thing I do. At the end of the day, the thing that I'm most excited about is operating. I mean, I'm an operator, a purebred operator at the end of the day.
So so URM is go over that again. What exactly is it?
It's an online education platform for rock and metal producers. So if you want to learn how to record and mix music, we teach you how to do that. So the way it works is that every month you get the actual raw multi-track session for a retail album. This month we have Tom Lord Alge mixing Angels and Airwaves, which is Tom DeLonge from Blink-182's other band. Last month we had a guy named Will Putney mixing Knocked Loose. Before that, some of the other bands we've had on that people might know would be like Bring Me the Horizon, Fall Out Boy, Day to Remember, that kind of thing. So you get the actual files, and then at the end of the month, the producer mixed it, and the album comes on and does a live stream where they show how they did it on the album, so you can kind of compare your work to theirs. It's $20. We have a few different tiers, but the main one is $20 a month, and we've got somewhere between. We don't publicly disclose it, but somewhere between 1 and 10,000 paying members across the world.
Oh no! So if you're in a band, you could sign on URM for let's say $20 a month, whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? I know you got different tiers, and you could watch these guys, these professionals, do what they're doing to get the music, produced to sound good.
Exactly. So if you want to know how Periphery or whatever does it, you don't have to guess. You can just watch, and Nolly will show you exactly how.
So they don't use DATs or anything anymore, I guess, or what? Or you don't.
No, they don't. But sometimes we had Daniel Bergstrand come on and mix a Meshuggah song from 1995, and he had to pull that off ADATs. So they're still floating out there.
That's crazy. So if you're in a band, I'm just saying you're in freaking Toledo, Ohio. You're saying, we got a local. We're good. I don't care what kind of metal or rock I get it, but I'm just saying we like what we're doing, but we don't know what to do next. I mean, hell, they could sign up to your thing and.
Yeah, it's amazing. And before we came along, there was nothing. I sort of pioneered this a little bit at Creative Live, but before this, there was just no way for you to get your hands on these sessions unless you knew somebody that worked at the studio or something like that.
Exactly.
And I mean, people would have paid $1,000 for this. It's funny how people get accustomed to this stuff. 10 years ago, someone would pay hundreds of dollars to get their hands on the files for this one song. And now it's $20 a month. And they're like,
And they're like, I don't know if it's worth it.
Yeah, I don't know. Or I could spend $20 on 4 cups of coffee.
Never mind, give me started by all these people claiming they're poor and then they're getting tattoos all over the place. Like, well, tattoos ain't cheap, man. So let's get our priorities here. So let me ask you a question. So back in the day, you'd have to go to a studio to record, you know what I'm saying? Then the engineer, whatever, would be the guy in charge. Can you literally do it in your your home-based studio now with just using Apple products or what? I don't care about. You know what I'm saying? You can do all that.
Absolutely. I mean, as one example of that, some people, if you're into this kind of music, you would know the band A Day to Remember. Big band. They've got platinum albums. Their album Common Courtesy from 2013 was recorded in Jeremy the singer. Jeremy and Andrew Wade lived in the same house. They recorded it in their house. I went over there. Andrew was mixing it in their spare bedroom, which is untreated, no acoustic panels or anything like that, on some Windows computer you could probably get for $1,200. And that thing was a Billboard Top 10 album. There's absolutely no reason you can't do all that. There are some certain things that you would need to go to a studio for, like recording drums and stuff like that. But, really, yes, you can do a pro quality album in a home studio. No question. People do it all the time. There's very few situations in which you need to go to a studio. There might be some times in which you want to for various reasons, but you don't need to.
Now, do most bands have drummers, or are they all just using and I watched the video you did on the 808s. I know I'm familiar with all that, but do most bands still have drummers, Finn, or they?
Bands, yes. But even then, there's ways of programming drums, which are more and more common because, recording drums is a pain in the butt, to make a long story short. So a lot of people choose to program the drums on the albums instead, and then, they'll play them live. But a lot of programmed drums on albums, or there's various different hybrid approaches, but I won't bore your audience with all the technical details on that.
Well, I noticed on one of your videos you were doing the double bass, and I just you hear some of these double basses, you're like, how is that humanly possible? And then you said it's literally not. And I was like, okay. That made me feel good. I was like, there's no way this could be some guy with a double bass playing that fast.
No.
So with URM, I mean, what kind of marketing, Punk Rock MBA is obviously you can't hurt, but obviously that's not your main gig. How you getting out there in front of people who are, budding musicians and entrepreneurial, and they say, look, we're going to do this on our own. How you take it to the masses so they can hear about you? I mean, this is awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of different options. The number of marketing channels available to a small company or an entrepreneur now is amazing. And it's a thing that I think is missed in the conversation now. Everyone hates big tech, for a lot of, justifiable reasons, a lot of valid reasons. But the part that's missed in that conversation, the reason we exist is because we can use Facebook and Instagram ads to reach people all over the world very, very, very cost effectively. So we can get a customer for, let's call it $20. And that customer becomes profitable in a month or two, depending on how the lifetime value works out, blah, blah, blah. But we couldn't do that, 15 years ago, when you had to do print ads and direct mail and all this stuff. To spin up a direct mail campaign is tens of thousands of dollars. And what if you get it wrong?
Yeah.
Well, there goes your operating capital. You're out of business. The lights are out.
And literally, you're out of business because you did not get the ad right, which is
Exactly. And now I can spin up a Facebook campaign, and like for $20, I'll get an idea of like, is this potentially going to work?
that's crazy.
And so this has enabled like this whole generation of direct to consumer businesses like that are now getting billion-dollar exits, like Dollar Shave Club and Warby Parker and Away and all these like direct consumer businesses would not exist without big tech, without Facebook and Google and Amazon in particular, because Amazon Web Services enables you to start a company with a credit card and $15. So you can have a company off the ground in a weekend with an AWS account, a credit card, with a credit card, and then AWS, Facebook, and Instagram marketing, and you got a business in 24 hours.
It's insane. And look, I have a deep love-hate relationship with Google, but I love them more than I hate them, simply because I'm sitting there thinking, I'm getting paid on YouTube, and I'm getting paid from, using Google spreadsheets. I mean, all that stuff is free. And I get they give the information. Look, I get all that, but I'm just sitting there thinking, you think back, like you said, just 10 years ago.
I mean, did somebody come to your house and put a gun to your head and force you to use it?
Exactly.
They sure did.
Man, well, what they're doing, and the reason and this is why I love what you're doing, because so many people are just sitting there negative on the world. I'm like, you have so much opportunity to be who you wanted always to be, and there's nothing literally holding you back other than, I don't know what it is. You don't want to take a risk, but how much risk is it truly?
And I should preface all that by saying this assumes, when I say all those things, it assumes you're an able-bodied person in a developed country.
Yes.
It's if you are one of these people that's unfortunate enough to get born in a literal garbage dump in the Philippines or something, pull yourself up by your bootstraps is, I would never say that to that person. But if you're a kid with a smartphone in America, that's able-bodied, like, I don't know what more you could possibly want from the world than that.
Well, the irony of it all is about 25 years ago, I had a small little record label, and I had guys in Philippines and Brazil and Russia, just as a distro, you know what I'm saying? Just trading CDs, trading the whole thing. And that was in the mid 90s, you know what I'm saying? And even back then there's still, I completely agree with what you're saying. If you're literally in India and there's 25 kids in your home, I get all that. But for us here in a modern America, it is, as fundamentally, it's so much different and so much more liberating than it used to be.
I mean, I started doing zines in like 93, maybe.
Yeah, I heard, right? It's
awesome. And I would have to sell. I actually, looking back on it, I'm like, how did I do that? I would have to somehow like market these on, I didn't have a marketing budget. I didn't know what marketing was. And yet somehow I was able to sell thousands of these things through the mail to people all over the world. And so I'm 16 years old, going to the post office, mailing stuff to,
exactly.
Iceland and Singapore. And they're probably wondering, what the heck is this guy doing? But it's like, man, if we were able to do something at that scale in 1994, you put a 100x on that with all the tools you have now. It's like, there's nothing stopping you.
So, but here's a question. All right, so we're not going to get too deep into our both backgrounds, but similar backgrounds. So how did we get the entrepreneurial bug? By watching our parents and say, that's not what we want to do? Or are you the firstborn or what,
I'm an only child.
Okay. So did we get I'm the firstborn. Did we get the entrepreneurial bug from being the firstborn, i.e. only child, or did we get the entrepreneurial bug? Like, what caused Finn and Josh to have this? I got to get out there and share this. You see what I'm saying? Where other people don't have that. Does that make sense what I'm asking you?
I do think that I think it is something that's born, not made.
Yes.
And that's not a judgment.
I agree.
We're all just different. I mean, my wife is not like this, and I'm glad, because that'd be a little too much. So I don't know. I think it's just a personality trait you're born with. And I think it's important for people to know who they are and to recognize, like, trying to fit a square peg into a round hole is going to cause problems. There's lots of people who are born entrepreneurs that make terrible employees. I mean, that's a very well-known thing. And you see those people sometimes frustrated and causing problems for themselves and the organization and all that kind of stuff. And then on the other hand, there's people who are trying to be entrepreneurs that, that just are not that person. And one is not better or worse than the other. They're just different. So to me, it goes back to like self-awareness and just understanding who you are. For me personally, I never, and I still don't necessarily think of myself as an entrepreneur or entrepreneurial person. Like I don't really, I mean, this is doing things the hard way. I don't really want to do things this way. Like sometimes I'm like, why am I doing this? I wish I was just one of these guys that shows up to my job at Microsoft, flies under the radar, some boring job nobody cares about, like accounts payable or something, collects 80 grand a year. You're not going to get rich off that, but it's a nice living. And just, a 9-to-5er, because that's playing much easier. Like, why am I playing things in hard mode? But again, I just realized this is who I am. I'm not that person. And it would be foolish of me to try to fit myself into that mold just because that's what I want.
When did you know that's who you were though? You see what I'm saying?
Probably not until like 5 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
And it would have been cool if I figured that out earlier, but I didn't. And I think there's a lot of people from our scene that don't figure these things out until later in life. That just is what it is. And part of what I would like to do with my channel is help people figure these things out earlier and easier than I did, and avoid some of the painful lessons that I had to learn.
And you got kids, Finn?
No.
Okay, so your wife
I would like to, but not yet.
Okay, understood.
She's 25 though, so she's got some time.
And she's working, like my wife is the same thing. She's not, and I say risk taker because it sounds so dramatic. Like I'm not like that at all. But
I think of myself as very risk averse, actually. But the risk, here's the thing, is that lots of times taking the conventional path is actually the riskier one, because one thing I've realized, there is no such thing as job security.
Yeah.
So the idea that you go work at Microsoft and that means you can coast for 30 years, fiction.
Yep.
They lay people off all the time. You get some terrible boss,
exactly,
or stuck in some bad part of the business that's going to like grind your career to a halt. And then you get laid off at 44 and, you're kind of flailing. So the reason why I do things the way I do things is actually because I am risk averse, because I don't want anybody else to have control over my fate. I mean, ultimately, like we're all part of a system much bigger than us. And I don't mean to make it sound like I have complete control over the world, because none of us do, but I don't want to place my fate in somebody else's hands. That's why I do this, because I am risk averse.
Yeah, well, the idea of, like that 44-year-old guy just got laid off from Microsoft. Now he also has a big fat mortgage he can't afford.
Yes, exactly.
That doesn't scare the crap out of you. Nothing would, that's for sure.
I mean, we live in you can see my house here. We live in a 2-bedroom condo. Yeah. We could afford something twice this big easily, but we don't. Even though, my wife has a great job. She works at Amazon. I'm doing well. We can afford something twice this big, but that is exactly what I see. I go past some of these houses here that are 800 grand with, 3 $50,000 cars in the driveway. And it's just like, man, I hope for your sake, you never get laid off, never end up in that bad spot, because that is a tough nut to crack every month. Not to mention, like, what is the opportunity cost of all that money parked in, at least in the case of the cars, depreciating assets? It just makes my soul hurt.
Well, it's not even, actually, it's even worse than being laid off, because it's the threat. It was sort of down.
Right. Yeah.
You're sitting there
it
thinking,
limits your options too. What if you hate your job? You can't quit because you got a $3,800 mortgage.
And I'm telling you, dude, that's the risk is actually hating your job, even though you're living this what looks to be a fancy schmancy life, but you're miserable as all can be. That's actually my in my channel. I talk a lot about that. I say, get out of your crappy old job. Some people like it, that's fine, but other people say they hate it. And I say, but they're worried about retirement. They're worried. I say, look, if you don't have debt, you have, the world is your oyster. But once you have these big debts, you are literally a slave to pay off those debts. Mm-hmm. if there's one thing I could teach my younger self, and I wish, man, I just tell you, it's just, I wish I would have avoided debt like the plague. And that doesn't mean you can't use it, systematically and whatnot, like like you were talking about with the
Don't
credit.
stumble into it blindly.
And just buy a house because the guy said, well, you can afford this house. It's just sad. So, so let me ask you a question. So now you got the channel for the music, and then you got the kind of a relatively new channel where you're kind of helping people in terms of personal finance and stuff, or just kicking the pants kind of channel. What are you doing over there?
I would just think of it as like, I think of it as like business and personal development.
Okay.
Anything under that heading about like starting your own company, or furthering your career if you work for someone else, and all that kind of like personal finance stuff that nobody told a lot of us. Just any of those sort of things, like that anything I would have liked to tell myself 15 or 20 years ago.
Do you think a lot of these people are actually graduating with, and this seems like an odd question, but there's a method to my madness in some degree, but it's one thing to, like, you got your master, I got masters, you got masters, and thankfully all my stuff.
I don't. I only have an undergrad degree. I'm a fake MBA.
Okay, gotcha. But do you think, I guess, how many people do you think are being sucked into the realm of they have to go to college because that's what they've been told for the last 40 years, where they're putting on their entrepreneurial hat on hold because they're like, this is what I have to do. And so now they're getting out of college with $50,000 and $60,000 debt, and they can never grasp their creativity because they have to pay off. Does that make sense what I'm asking, Finn?
It does. And that's true. But on the other hand, I just have a hard time. It's like, dude, nobody put a gun to your head and made you take the damn loan.
Yeah.
Like, the terms were right there. If you didn't read it, like I took on a lot of college debt. When I graduated, I had $90,000 of debt. Ooh. But it was deliberate, and it was worth it, because right now I make 4 times what I did when I graduated from college 2 years ago.
You knew what you're getting into.
Yeah. And part of that is because I didn't go until I was 25.
Man.
However, it's like, I just don't buy this like victim narrative of, it's like, dude, nobody forced you to take on that loan, and it's not like it's a mystery.
Right.
Like, like how, yeah, exactly. It's not like this is a secret that college, like that student debt is a thing and that it can make your life more difficult. Like, I just don't buy the victim card. That said, there are a lot of people in this system who have bad incentives. And I think a lot of that goes back to the fact that these are federally backed, because it creates a moral hazard for pretty much everybody. Why are college tuitions going up 10% a year or whatever they are?
Right.
Because why wouldn't they?
Right. They got the government to back them.
Exactly. Why wouldn't they? If the kid defaults, so what? Who cares?
And
so $80,000 for a creative writing degree? Sure, why not? Uncle Sam will foot the bill if the kid defaults. So and how do we get them to choose our school instead of the other one? We'll build some fancy new student rec center.
And put some rich guy's name on it so he can feel like he's giving back. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's all a racket, and I don't think anybody necessarily has bad intentions. It's just that, what's rule number 1 of economics? People respond to incentives.
Yeah.
I think we've created a system that incentivizes behavior that we don't want.
But you went to, I went in the Army because I was horrible at high school. You went to school at 25. I went in at 22, which that 4 year, for a young man, I really believe that 4-year time, the interlude between high school and college is huge for maturity. What made you say, hey, all right, I'm not, like, when you got you were on the you were on the newspaper in high school as well. And then you said, what's that?
And the debate team, which I loved.
Yeah,
debate is one of the best things I ever did in my life.
Why didn't you? I mean, it seemed to me you would have been an academic, would have been a nice flow through. But in hindsight, it's glad you didn't. I'm glad I didn't. But what made you pause before you went to college?
Well, I did go for a quarter, and I got like straight D's because I just would rather go to shows and hang out. I just didn't want to be there, and I wish that my parents would have, like, put their foot up my butt and told me, like, what are you doing? But they didn't. So whatever, can't blame them. But at least I wisely said, well, staying here would be a huge waste of money. So what's the point of spending a bunch of money, because this is all coming out of my pocket. My parents are not paying for this, So, I mean, that's moral hazard part one right there, is all these kids whose parents are paying for this stuff and just sort of forcing them through the system, regardless of whether they're actually getting value out of it or not. But whatever. It's a whole other, we could do a whole podcast about incentives and how to align everybody's incentives, because that's a thing that I'm very passionate. It's kind of an obscure topic, but it's an important one.
Incentives drive everything, man. Everything is crazy.
They do. And like, I use that for myself. I use that for the people who work for us. I mean, just understanding like if things aren't, if there's things that aren't turning out the way you want them to, maybe take a step back and ask yourself, what are the incentives and where, and how can you change that? Because people do respond to incentives. It's, funny how it works.
Did you ever read a book on business or a book on economics or anything where you found that, or just from experience, the low points of life, you say, something, you got an epiphany of some sort? How did you, because that's 100%, I could not agree more.
Well, I don't read books very much anymore.
Okay.
Just because I don't think there's very many things that are worth a book. There are some things that are, and I read a lot of those in college, because one of the things I did is, well, I'm paying a lot to be here. I'm going to take full advantage of every resource that I possibly can. And I went to the library all the time. I would go every week and check out, 10 books. Yeah. And I didn't read all of them, but I would try to read at least one or two, or half of one, whatever, just get what I could out of it. I would just pick up some random book about behavioral economics or something. And,
right on, man.
I would just basically go to the economics and business section and just pick up random books. And I read a ton of stuff there that completely changed my worldview. I did the same thing with journals, all these academic journals, because it's the only time in my life where I'm going to have access to all these obscure journals. So and I didn't understand all of it, but I pick up a quantitative finance journal and read that. And I didn't understand all of it because it's really technical, but at least I understood this is how these people think.
Right.
And this is the kind of work that these people do. And I would go talk to all my professors, like they have office hours. And so like one of my professors worked for the Commodities Futures Exchange Commission in Chicago.
Right.
And so he had like really deep knowledge about how financial markets worked. And he would talk about it in class a little bit, and nobody cared at all. So he could tell that nobody cared. It's this lecture class with 200 people in it. They don't care about the intricacies. But I said, hey, could I come to your office hours and ask you about this?
He's like, yes, please.
Yeah. I was like, is that okay? And he was like, yeah, people usually just come to complain about their grades. If you actually want to talk about class, that's great. So I would go there and just ask him, well, I don't understand. Why does the SEC care about this instead of that?
Right.
Well, let me explain. Well, they probably shouldn't, but here's why they do.
Why? See, this is my thing. How is it that you and I and many others, but not, why do we have that sense? This is my thing on it. Like, just going back, let's go back to punk rock and hardcore for a second.
Yeah.
The first time you heard a electric guitar, you're probably like, oh, first time I heard Black Sabbath, I was like, holy crap, where has this been? And then my first introduction to punk is when I moved to the DC area from Maine. I heard Void. It was like literally like this. Why? But there's something in that brain that says, this is me. Is it nature, nurture? I mean, I've always just been intrigued. Why do people like metal versus why do people like pop? Why do people like to dive in deep into quantitative economics versus most people just want to play fantasy football? Why? I just, it baffles my mind. You know what I'm saying?
This is one of these days I would like to learn more about this. I had a professor that studied this, I guess the academic field, somebody who's, you can maybe correct me or someone who's listening could correct me, but my understanding is that that field of study is called trait theory. And it seems to be that those questions are, hotly debated within that field. And I'd like to know more. I have to think that a large amount of it is physics. It's like biology. Because we know that in some combination of atoms, the human brain can work this way versus that way. So I have to think that some component of it is physics at the end of the day. But whatever, it just is what it is. And we don't choose who we are. And to our conversation earlier, you see a lot of people. I don't know. Like there's a girl I know who because of her parents being who they are, like really forced her to to go to school for mechanical engineering. And she was failing out, and knowing her, I'm just like, she's not stupid or anything like that. She's smart. It's just like, she is not a mechanical engineer. Like, she does not want to sit there and grind through calculus and physics classes and stuff. And so she switched to fashion design or fashion merchandising, and she crushed it. And now she works at a super cool company in New York, like top of the food chain, like Fashion House in New York. So it's just a question of like, her nature in this context was a failure. Her nature in this other context was a home run. So I think it's about understanding who you are and putting yourself in a situation where your nature is an asset, not a liability.
How do you find that? You see what I'm saying? Like, how does somebody, and the only reason I think this guy got 4 kids, you know what I'm saying? And they're all different. They're all unique. They're all, I'm telling you, man. Well,
in probably a lot of unexpected ways too, right? You're
right. You're like,
oh, this one's turning out like that. Interesting. I didn't see that coming.
That's, the fun. And I always, like, I'm not telling you, I just, it's always been intriguing to me. Like, why does one go that way and the other goes that way? And then the one that goes this way, who really should be going that way, a la this girl you just talked about. And when she gets that way, all of a sudden it's like, for her, the light goes off. She goes, I love this. This isn't work anymore. This is what I want to do. And if I have to get paid, even more power to me. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
well, I think the way you find it is to think about it, which most people don't do because we don't talk about introspection very much. And that's where hardcore comes in for me. Yeah. So for one, a big part of the way that I learned that is from my parents. So my mom was an alcoholic and she went to AA and these other programs. And so from my earliest memories, she's in these programs, reading these books and stuff, like trying to understand herself and what's broken and what's working and how to adjust it. And then my dad being a corrections officer, he was in the Navy and then corrections officer. And so, choice and consequence is the theme there. I remember, so he became a counselor later on in his career, and a counselor in a prison is not like, hey, Josh, tell me about your feelings. It's more like, okay, Josh, I see you have a parole hearing coming up in 8 months.
Right.
If you want to have your best chance, you need to take this anger management course. Right. You need to go to this job training program and make sure you don't get any more infractions for this, because I see you got a couple of those on your jacket and they're not going to like that. And then they can either say, F you, man, you're not the boss of me. I can do what I want. In which case my dad would go, okay, like, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to like it. I'm just telling you this is the way it is. And so, hearing those kind of conversations, again, from when I was a child, I think just sort of instilled that idea in me of like, it's up to you. You do whatever you want. You just got to live with the consequences, for better or for worse. And then hardcore for me played a big role when I found Youth of Today, and then later Ray's band Shelter. I'm not like a Hare Krishna or anything like that, but the stuff he talked about in the Shelter lyrics, it's like very deep introspective stuff that I still really haven't heard any other band talk about.
Ray Kappa, I listened to an interview he just did a couple months ago, and I'm not a Christian. I've loved Youth Today growing up. I was never into Shelter, but and that whole Krishna thing with like Next Step Up and stuff is all just kind of weird to me. It's like
there's a lot of weird stuff there, but also a lot of, these are people who are looking for truth,
for meaning. And I'm listening to Ray Kappa, and I'm like, this guy, I was incredible. I mean, here he is. He's got 5 kids now, and I'm 49. He's probably a little bit older than me. And I'm like, he's still just, I was blown away by the level of positivity. And it was fantastic, Finn. I was like, here's a guy who thinks about this introspectively, like you said, and is able to relate that to other people to think. And I thought it was fantastic, especially coming from, the punkish background where a lot of people are just doing self-destructive behavior. And this guy,
and
before I forget, one thing I was going to suggest, if you ever get a chance, there's a guy, Flemlo Raps, who does What Happened to This Guy for Football. What happened to whatever. You might, if you ever get a chance, what happened to Dan Mahoney from No for an Answer? What happened to Ray Cat? You know what I'm saying? That might be something that'd be kind of cool to do. I'm not telling you what to do, but Flemmo, his best videos by far and away are like What Happened to Trent Richardson from the University of Alabama. It's incredible. I'm sure it takes a long time to do, but I've always wondered, like, what happened to some of these guys? JR from Next Step Up. What's that guy do? I mean, it'd be obviously that's a very low niche there in terms of the view, but it might be interesting.
You never know. I mean, sometimes the stuff that I think is going to do well, eats crap. And then other times the thing that I don't think anyone's going to care about gets 300,000 views. You never know.
That's my biggest view is a video I almost did not do. Because I said, did I just do something like that? And I did a video. And right before I was going to publish, I think I just did something on, maybe I shouldn't. And I said, screw it, let's hit publish anyway. By far and away, that's my biggest, well, not by far away, but my biggest, it's not even a great video. It's just
yeah, you never, exactly. It's like the one that takes off. You're like, really? That one? Okay.
How did you end up start with your YouTube channel? Like, what made you, start doing it?
Well, my game plan basically is to be wherever attention is in the current, age of media. So I started doing zines in the 90s because print was what people did back then. I had some blogs in the 2000s because that's where the action was at that time. And then it became clear to me, by 2015 or something like that, blogs were just dead, waste of time. I still kept doing them a little bit kind of just for fun, but then I just eventually realized, if I really want to be where the action is, I got to get on YouTube. I made videos for years, so I already knew how to do the technical part of it, which is actually the easiest part of the whole thing. That's really, I just decided if I want to have attention, I need to, you got to fish where the fish are, right?
Yeah. Do you have any concern like getting on? I know a lot of people, women in particular, which is too bad, but they get, they don't want to get on camera. Like my wife, she will not get on camera to save her life. And
I don't love it. But it's part of the deal. Yeah. Although there's people that have successful, like, do you know Company Man? Have you seen that channel?
I think I have. Yeah.
So he'll do a video about like Darden restaurants or something like that. Like about Red Lobster's, history or something like that. Yeah. I mean, they're not like fantastic, but they're good for like an audience that doesn't know much about business. But anyway, they're basically, slideshows. He never shows his face. So you can do YouTube without ever showing your face. Man. I chose to show my face and use my real name because I want to use this as a way for people to get to know me and to build my name and reputation. I used like a fake name before when I blogged, just because I didn't want to put myself out there. But I just decided, you know what, I'm going to go all in. Yep. And I do understand, especially for women, it really is harder because people are going to say much nastier things and they need to worry about stalkers and stuff like that we don't have to. And that is a true privilege. So I understand. But for me personally, I just said, you know what, I'm just going to go all in on this thing. And it paid off for me. And I'm incredibly grateful for that opportunity. And again, to our conversation before, it's like, well, Google spent billions and billions and billions of dollars building this platform, and I'm so incredibly grateful for that. I wish that I could, YouTube's not perfect. Google's not perfect in lots of ways, but I just really wish I could find some of these people and give them a hug because they built this thing that's done so much for me.
And YouTube is still operating at a loss. You know what I'm saying? Yet there's still
they don't break it out, so we don't know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's they should. I think that's I think that is a matter that their board has dropped the ball on, is they don't break out YouTube revenue separately from Google.
Really? All right. So it's just like I don't want to say an urban legend, but there's no evidence that says YouTube is literally operating at a loss.
There's no way to know.
Really?
Nope. Go read their 10K. It's not in there.
See, there you go, man. You can't, just like Abraham Lincoln says, if it's on the internet, it might not be true.
They've said certain things in the past. It was true a few years ago because they said so publicly. They've said some things recently, and if you read between the lines of some of their financial statements, it suggests that YouTube is now profitable, but nobody knows for sure outside of Google.
So if zine, print, blog, and then video, how long will video be in ascendancy or ascendant, whatever it is? How long do you think?
I think it will last forever. Whether it will be YouTube or not is a question. Probably not. But that said, people always talk about starting a YouTube competitor, and it's like, dude, what, like, do you think like you are going to hit all the same structural barriers that YouTube does? For one, like content moderation at scale
Right.
is they've got 2 billion users. Content moderation at that scale is really hard. So there's a guy named Werner Vogels who's the CTO of AWS, Amazon Web Services, and he has a good framework for this. He says that their business is governed by 3 laws: the laws of physics, the laws of economics, and the laws of the land. And so the laws of physics are like how fast does light travel, for example, so latency, network latency, stuff like that. The laws of economics, which is, people respond to incentives and all that stuff, and that you have to be profitable. And then the law of the land, which is all the regulatory stuff like, COPPA and the DMCA and GDPR and all that kind of stuff. Anybody else jumping into that pond is going to hit this. They're going to hit the same barriers because it comes down to those 3 fundamental laws. Not to mention the fact that like people forget that at the heart of YouTube or Instagram or these other things are massive data centers at a scale that nobody. There's metal at the end of that. Like the cloud is just a word for data. Like it does, you know what I mean? It doesn't live in the air.
Right.
It lives in CDNs scattered around the country. And
that really takes electricity to operate, by the way. You know what I'm saying? It's not just
So it's not a matter of just saying we believe in creators.
Right.
Cool. But you still have to answer to Uncle Sam, and you still have to deal with, latency and, building data
physics.
Centers.
You still have to have the data center. YouTube, everyone bashed on YouTube, and it actually, in some ways, it drives you crazy because YouTube has been wonderful for me. It's obvious as a business person, but just to learn things. I mean, hell, I was able to change my garbage disposal the other day just watching YouTube. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, and how many people's lives has it changed just from the fact that they looked up how to do something on YouTube, and that was the thing that unlocked some life-changing opportunity for them.
Absolutely.
It's got to be millions of people.
It's in I don't know. On top of that, I'm sitting there thinking, do you really need to? I don't know. It seems to me like some of this stuff is so over the top. Like YouTube demonetized. It's like, if you remember what YouTube's business is to make YouTube money. You know what I'm saying? It's not to provide you a platform. It's to make them money. And they're going to make money by selling advertisers to the people who pay the money, who don't want to be associated with whatever it is.
Here's the thing people need to understand. The giant, massive, multi-billion dollar pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which every company, but really Facebook and Google are chasing, is all those TV dollars.
Yes. Exactly.
All the money, this brand marketing, which is people just pouring money into like TV ads that probably don't work, or at least work not very well in 2020, but there's nowhere else to spend that money. And everyone, because like of what you just said, there's so many conditions about TV that make it the best option for these current brand advertisers. One of which is that that nothing that you run your ad on is going to be super bad.
Exactly.
At worst it'll be South Park, but even then, like, it's pretty easy to just say, don't run our ad after 10 p.m.
Right. Exactly.
So if you are Tide or Pampers or whatever else, where you have a family friendly brand, and people don't understand that if your video shows up, that if your ad shows up on some edgy video, people out there don't understand that that's just programmatically generated, and that doesn't mean that Pampers believes in what this video says. So, and besides which, if you're the CMO or worse, some peon marketing manager, and then the CMO comes to you and says, my son said he saw one of our ads next to such and such. What the hell are you doing with our money? Like, you know what? Never mind. I'm just going to go back to TV.
Then it is so obvious to me, Finn. I'm like sitting there thinking, you can see what's happening.
So at the end of the day, this is good for YouTubers because if we create a system in which all those billions of dollars of brand marketing on YouTube, we all win.
It's crazy. I'm sitting there thinking, we want this to happen because it makes us more legitimate. Thus, there's be more. And I was watching Tim Pool. He does videos.
Yep.
and he was saying, I thought this was incredibly informative, or whatever the word is, genius, I don't know. But he's saying he probably gets more views on his channel than CNN does.
Oh,
And
for sure he does. Look at the view counts of like these news. People are like, dude, you got 1,200 views and it's coming from like NBC News.
Or in my competition, like Vanguard and Morningstar, I get
Yeah.
more views on Vanguard and Morningstar. But I guarantee if you look at CNN ad revenues on CNN, the cable network, versus Tim Pool on or just YouTube, CNN is dwarfing them. It doesn't take a rocket science.
Right.
YouTube's like, we need that to level off, and thus we want to make sure idiots aren't freaking ruining the platform. I don't get why people get so upset by that. It's not censorship. It's business. Anyway. All right, so I'll let you go here in just a second. So before, just a music question. What was the first, when you first heard something, what kind of band or song or anything that says, oh, this is, where have you been all my life? Like I had said way early before. What was the first song or band that you heard and you're like, man, that's calling to me?
I saw Suicidal Tendencies on MTV News in 1989. They had been banned from playing in LA for 5 years or something because of like gang violence at their shows. And this was, the city government or whoever decided they could play shows again. And so they had this show in the parking lot of Tower Records in LA, and MTV News covered it. And I happened to see it when I was 11 or 12 or whatever. And I didn't know what it was, but I was into it. And then I got some like birthday money or something like that and went out and bought their cassette, and the rest is history.
And the rest is history, man. It's
yeah.
And yeah, you play a little bit. You play a little guitar and drums, you said, or just guitar?
Yeah, I'm not a very good drummer, but
are you in a band right now or anything?
No, I'm not really interested in playing music. I recorded some of my own stuff a few years ago just to kind of learn how to record just for fun. And I do enjoy it, but it's just like, there's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
And it's just not, it's just not a priority. I'm a big believer in opportunity cost. And so I'm always, I'm always considering that. To me, life is one big NPV calculation. That's how I see everything.
Finn, you're crazy, man. This is nuts. When your better half, is she into the music, or is she like, oh, keep that away from me?
Yeah. She likes all of it. Pretty much all the same kind of stuff as I do.
Did you meet her like at a show or something like that, or?
More or less, like kind of just through friends of friends in the scene.
All right, so what would you suggest? Most of my audience is not 25-year-old kids with skateboards, but for folks regardless of music, but just obviously you're doing something right. You know what I'm saying? On YouTube as an entrepreneurial, risk-averse entrepreneur. I see, just real quick, I think that a lot of people think this Gary V entrepreneur stuff is the way to go. And I like Gary V, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, are very risk-averse. We say, okay, I'm definitely going to look not once, but twice before I leap. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
you want to be a row on some bean counter spreadsheet, that decides whether you have a job or not, because that's all you are. They don't care about you or your family or your life or anything else. You're just a row on a spreadsheet to them, and I sure don't like the sound of that.
No, especially when you got a mortgage, for sure. All right, Finn, that's good stuff, man. And I'll put links in the show notes. Email me all your various things. We'll put it in here. And so just real quick, I'm gonna stop here. Give me 2 seconds. I'll stop recording. But any last words for the audience here? Don't hang up yet. I want to chat real quick.
No, I'm just really great conversation. Thanks so much for having me on. And for anybody that is wondering what the heck we're talking about, if you made it this far, thank you. And, I'll be happy to share this on my end, because I think this is the kind of stuff that, the younger version of us really needed to hear.
Man, right on. Hey, thanks. Hold on just a second.